Uh, Good afternoon. Welcome to this month's edition of the webinar series on applied analytics success stories. My name is Rajesh Tyagi, and I'm the organizer for this series. Now, this series is an initiative of the Inform section on practice. So let me just spend a minute on this one before we proceed with the webinar today. So the purpose of this section is to advance the practice of analytics, operations research, and management sciences. And to do that, we support a number of activities. So these include the major annual awards that you see in the blue on the screen. We also have some monthly session. So we have Applied Analytics Success Stories webinar. Again, this is the one in the red font. This is then after today, the next one would be on June 18th next month. That'll be on deep transformation with smart supply chain digitization. We are also starting a new webinar series called Sustaining Outstanding Analytics Organizations. And the purpose of that webinar is to basically talk to analytics managers in the various organizations to find out what kind of projects they work on, what kind of people and skills they hire, and just generally talk about their organization as such. So going forward, these two webinar series will alternate every month. So after June, the outstanding organization one will take place in July, and then back to applied analytics in August. And again, all the future schedule is listed on the website. We also have a monthly virtual networking happy hour event, which is held on a Friday. The next one is on April 30th. It's a more relaxed setting. The discussion topic varies with each meeting. And again, you can always go to the website and find out what the topic is and register for that event. And again, if you like these webinars and these other events, we hope you will consider joining the Informs practice section. So on to our presentation today. So the title for today's presentation is Veritec Solutions Revolutionizes Self-Storage Pricing Practices. We are pleased to have Dr. Warren Lieberman, President of Veritec Solutions. Veritec is a consulting and software development firm focused on helping companies optimize their pricing and revenue management capabilities. Warren began his career in yield management at American Airlines in 1984 and is a leading expert in non-traditional applications of revenue management and dynamic pricing. He has worked with firms in more than 30 industries. Warren received a Bachelor of Science degree in mathematics with a specialization in computer science from State University of New York in Binghamton. He holds a PhD in operations research from Yale University. He has also held a variety of positions in the Informs organization. We will also have one of Warren's clients, Kevin, who will be here to talk about the benefits that their company has received from using this particular software and talk about the implementation experience as well. And before we start with the talk, one more item, couple of quick notes. One, we have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So if you have any questions, just hit the Q&A button and type in your questions. And at the end of the talk, Warren will read through those questions and answer them. And this session actually will continue till 1:30. We call it a networking session. What we typically do is Warren will answer some of those questions after his talk, and then Kevin, his client, will also answer some of his questions. So that would pretty much overflow into that hour and go all the way up to 1:30 p.m. Eastern time. So with that said, let me hand it over to the speaker. All yours, Warren.
Rajesh, thank you very much. Delighted to be part of this. Thank you for all your efforts on organizing this and also to Informs. I think especially in this past year, these webinars and all of the I'll call it services that Informs is provided to the analytics community has just been fabulous. So thank you very much. Let's see, if you stop sharing your screen, I will start sharing mine.
Let's see. I'm trying to figure out what do I need to do here. Am I still sharing it?
No, I think I can actually stop your sharing and just start it. Let's just see.
Please do.
Yep, perfect.
Yeah.
With any luck, you should be seeing a slide, my slide now. Is that right?
We see that, yes.
Perfect. Okay. So I'm thrilled to be here. As I said, thank you very much. I think I have for me, I have some very exciting stuff to talk about. I believe that what I'm going to present here is truly, I'll call it it's either a very large evolutionary step or a revolutionary step. I'll let you make that decision in the way pricing can be carried out. And quite frankly, I'll make some bold claims there. And so in the Q&A, if I haven't convinced you that this is a big difference, I'll be very curious to hear some questions and get in some really good discussion on this. And then, as I said, as you said, we have Kevin Bowman from Storage Mart, one of the first companies, it was actually the first self-storage company to implement the concepts and the methods that I'm going to present today. They started implementing it back in about 2015, and he can talk quite a bit about the way it has, how important it has been to their company. So where I want to start, just to kind of set a little bit of the stage, is I'm going to take my first few slides, show some ads from Tesla from several years ago. And I just want to kind of get everybody in the mood and the thought of customer segmentation and how companies, the variety of ways that companies sell their products. And so here you see for Tesla Model X, one of their lowest product, if you will, was the Tesla Model X with the 75 kilowatt battery for a price of $73,400. Total after you do everything, they're $88,000. Their middle price, their middle product, was a 90 kilowatt battery. And so if you look at all of the total price here at 98,000, just as a reminder, hang on, let me go back the other way. The 75 kilowatt battery, about 89,000. The 90 kilowatt battery, about 99,000, so about a $10,000 difference. And then you jump to their best battery and you see a jump not of $10,000, but of $40,000. And I would actually argue that one of the reasons they probably did this, where they have a $10,000 difference between the first two and a $40,000 between the next two, is not so much cost, resultant of differences in cost, but the way in which you set your prices there can have a dramatic impact on which of the products people purchase. And we're going to come back to this in today's session a bit later as we go through this, but I just wanted to have you have that in the back of your mind, knowing that, you know, when you have a $10,000 and then a $40,000 gap, people are going to gravitate towards that middle product. Psychologically, you start combining a lot of what goes on with pricing at this point, and people start thinking, well, I can get something that's better for, it's only 10,000. I don't want to go all the way to that top line product because it's just too much of a jump. And so the way you set those prices, if it was 10 and 10 or 10 and 40 or 20 and 40, would actually have a dramatic impact on what gets selected, not just because of the price of the actual product, but because of the choices that you can make and the alternatives that are available to you. And today's session is going to be very focused on understanding the impact and the importance of alternative products. And just something that we might go into later in the question and answer, I want to raise that because often in price demand modeling, when companies are doing elasticity estimates, they sometimes will, or they will often have models that look at the price and have demand dependent on the price of a product, and they may often not include issues about what's the price relative to another price, and gets very, very complicated, as you all might imagine. So with that as just some starting points, and we're going to talk for probably about 40 minutes or so, and then open up to questions. What I'm going to introduce today is a dynamic price differentiation based on inventory availability. And really keep in mind that we're really talking about dynamic differentiation. So what we're going to be doing is looking at how can you adjust the price of a specific unit of inventory that's typically sold at the same prices of others, and it's going to depend on what else is available. And the work that we're doing in self-storage, as far as I know, is the only industry where these concepts are actually being applied on a dynamic, in a dynamic manner. And we're going to show you a little bit of what goes on in other industries to set that stage. Okay. Now, from a traditional revenue management perspective, one of the ways that revenue management has, I'll call it, typically worked is that prices get differentiated with the use of purchase fences or other elements that create multiple products, whereas the products that are more expensive are actually more desirable than the ones that are less expensive. And there are a variety of ways to do this. It may have to do with the refundability of a product, your ability to change dates on travel, if you will. When revenue management began in the 1980s in the airline industry, you had to stay a Friday night over a Friday night in order to get lower fares typically. And that was because the airlines recognized that price-sensitive customers would be more willing and more likely to stay over a Friday night, that is your leisure traveler, than a business traveler. And so it gave them another way of differentiating the products, but making it kind of appeal more or less, or be more or less desirable based on price sensitivity. That's the traditional. The other aspect of traditional, which we often forget about, is that we have static assignments of inventory to different product classes. And again, it is based on our knowledge of customer segments and what they consider to be desirable. So again, first class, premium, economy, standard economy in an airline, or the compact, mid-size, full-size in cars. These are all static assignments where, a car, for example, might be assigned to that is a compact car, that is a mid-sized car, and that's what the price is. But then within the mid-sized cars, you can choose whatever you want, and it's all the same price. So this is where differential pricing, as I said, applies to a class of inventory, but not to the specific units. And so in today's session, we're going to say what happens if we relax the constraint on inventory unit assignment. So we're going to go down a level into where specific units of inventory have typically been sold at the same price, and we're going to show a method for actually differentiating them, and what does that mean. Okay, so when you do this, just to think of a few implications up front, when you do this, you have to understand that if you're going to differentiate the prices at the unit level, it means there is a much greater emphasis on the importance of communication. And in addition, what somebody might be willing to spend for a particular product is going to depend on the alternatives, the desirability of the alternatives. So the price of inventory item A is actually going to depend on whether inventory item B, C, or D is available or not. And again, before I get to what we're going to be doing in self-storage, let's talk a little bit about how this currently works. Here you see an image. This was an image for the Golden State Warriors. We wish them a lot of luck in tonight's game against the Grizzlies for their last playoff berth. But here, before COVID, you could see this was a picture of the secondary tickets market. And the red dots represent seats that were available for sale. Now, in this situation, the seats themselves are generally being sold by people who are trying to resell their seats. So if you look at this, you can take a look at this red dot here in the corner, this seat, you can see that what somebody might be willing to pay for that seat is very likely to be affected by what are the alternatives near that seat. So in this situation, you've got two seats rows ahead. What this seat can be sold for is going to be different if those seats are available or not available. So just thinking about that, in this market, typically if those two seats right up front, right there, were going to be sold, typically there is no mechanism that automatically changes the price of that seat. And so what you're seeing is there's no mechanism that, if you will, changes the price of an inventory item based on the desirability of it relative to what else is available for sale. And so if we look at this on the airline side, actually, we just mentioned on the airline side, one way to think about it is, should your middle seat, if it's not reclining, should it be priced lower than seats that do not recline? I mean, typically this is not the way it's going today. Middle seats are typically priced the same. If they have a little bit of different legroom, an exit row may be priced differently than other rows. But rows that are towards the front, the same seat, again, they tend to be statically assigned. So here is a picture of an airline seats. You can see here, they were adding $72 for this seat. They added a little bit of a higher premium because they know people sometimes like to sit in that front row. So it's $76 for that aisle seat. But you can see these prices do not change as seats on the plane get sold. It's a static assignment. We're now going to flip all of this, and I'm going to start to talk about what do we want to do, what are we doing in the self-storage industry. So having all of this customer segmentation as background for what we do today, what we're going to try to do now is move to a slightly different world. And we're going to look at what happens if, instead of defining a product with a pre-expectation of what customers will believe is desirable and have them choose between a class of products or purchase restrictions, we're going to give them the power to decide, do they believe something is more desirable or not? And if so, do they want to pay for it? So we're going to create a structure that I would say is much more flexible. It's going to simultaneously be price competitive so we can attract those price sensitive customers, but then allow those who are more service sensitive to willingly choose to take a unit of inventory that they prefer within the same class of inventory units. And so I kind of like this little optical illusion because as you know, many of you have probably seen this before, where as you're looking at that picture, if you stare at it long enough, you can either see an older lady or a younger lady, or if you look at it, you can be switching back and forth. And just a lot of what's going on right now in what we're about to talk about is the interplay of psychology and pricing. Okay. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with a self-storage facility, they come in all shapes and sizes. Just to give you a little bit of an idea of what you can see, this is a map of a self-storage facility. It has 3 floors. So you can see on the ground floor, you get a whole variety of shapes and sizes. On the second floor, you see many more shapes and sizes. And even on the third floor, more and more information. So typically the way self-storage facilities sell their units, they sell it often based on size, that is square footage of the unit. And in a multi-story facility, they may even vary based on, is it a ground floor? Is it an upper floor? Do you need to take an elevator? Can you just get in? And they may sell it based on other attributes as well. Is it climate controlled? Is it not climate controlled? So there could be some physical differentiations on the unit itself. Before we go to how they're actually selling this and the impact of what we're doing, I want to give you just a little bit of a thought exercise. And so I would like you to have in your mind, if you made the same size unit, the same attributes of a unit, again, units with the same attributes and size, so they're kind of considered the same. If you were giving customers a choice of paying for, call it a standard unit, or something that might be more convenient, just because maybe it's 1 turn away from the elevator versus 2 turns away versus 3 turns of the elevator away from the elevator. You know, what percentage of customers do you think would be willing to pay for a more convenient unit? And on top of that, I just want you to begin thinking about, do you think that the likelihood of customers choosing a more convenient unit will vary based on the channel through which they are renting their unit? So if they rent online, they rent from a call center, they rent at the store, you know, just give some thought to what extent do you think those upgrade rates will vary? And it's probably worth noting that when you're in the self-store, when you're renting a self-storage unit, everything is on a month-to-month basis. So people can move out with 30 days notice. They and the operator can change the rent of a unit with 30 days notice. So it's a very flexible system. And then give a little thought as well to how much extra customers will pay for convenience. I'm gonna give you about 10 seconds just to be thinking about that. Okay. Now, where I want to start is pre-COVID. What we did was we identified, I'll call it, within each group of comparable units. So within each group of units that, let's say, we're on the same floor of a facility and we're the same size, but just because if I go back to the map for a moment, if you look here, maybe the units near the stairs right here might be priced a bit higher than the ones that are halfway down the corridor, which are priced a little higher than the ones all the way down the corridor. Maybe they're priced a little higher than the ones that are further away from the stairs. So what we're talking about is differentially pricing the units that typically are sold at the same price and giving people a choice to choose, call it a unit that they consider more desirable, for a higher price. Now, when we first began implementing this program, okay, we started with 3 different groupings. Again, going to the psychology of the customer purchase. We didn't want to overwhelm the customer with too many choices. So we thought about what I will call good, better, and best pricing. And what you can see here is that when customers could only reserve the cheapest unit online, and the process of offering a more convenient unit was done at the store, you generally had about, call it 70 to 80% of the people choosing the standard unit, and about 20 to 30% of the people choosing to upgrade. And so just give it some thought to whether or not that was consistent with your prior expectation, because as we move to a world where we can allow this choice to be made online and or via the call center, the upgrade rates are actually going to go up very significantly. So when we started with this, we were seeing a nice take up. Now, in terms of revenue impact, if I say 30% of the people upgrade, and let's just say they're paying 10% more on average, that means that's an impact of 3% on the revenue. And in a business like this, where the fixed costs are very high, the variable costs associated with the rental are very small, a 3% lift in incremental revenue is fairly significant. And as we get through some of the later developments, that 3% is actually going to change to 6%. And ultimately, some companies are actually receiving 8 or 9% more revenue from this type of process. Right? So let's try to put this into a real tangible understanding. With COVID, more and more of the product sales for many products, and self-storage is no different, has gone online. Now, here is a large company, and this is a very recent web shot. So this currently is a company that is not doing value pricing. They are not differentially pricing units of the same size, if you will. And I want to show you what happens online. So so that you can see here, the units are presented. Okay, here is your class of units, 10 feet by 10 feet. They're $197 a month. There's another class of units that are 10 feet by 15 feet for $232 a month. Okay, then here is down below, you have another 10 by 10. What differentiates this unit from this unit is this one's an upstairs unit, this one's a ground floor unit. So you can see that the units are differentiated based on certain attributes, but if we choose a group, so let's just pretend we say, you know what, I don't want to spend $248, I want to be, I'm going to go upstairs. All of the 10 by 10 units, if we choose it, got the price of $197 there. You can see here that for this company, they now let you reserve a 10 by 10 unit. It's at $197. So all of those units in the same asset class are being sold for the same price. Okay. Now let's take a look at a company that uses value pricing and what they've done on their website. So again, it's a different layout, but the main page is essentially the same. You have different sized units, different attribute, different inventory classes. Again, here's a 10 by 10 on the ground floor. Here's a 10 by 10 that's climate controlled. So these are not climate controlled. That's how they're different. So let's take a look at this 10 by 20 unit, which starts at $115. Notice the language of starting at. And let's see what happens when we choose that unit. When you choose that unit, instead of just having that price for the standard, for that one price of 115, you now see you can have a choice. You get that standard unit for 115, or you can choose, in this case, what they call best value or deluxe. And the best value unit is $17 more, or the deluxe unit is $37 more. Now, I want you to take a look at the language that they're using for a moment. The standard unit just says ground floor. Look what the best value unit says. Closer to an entrance, elevator, or multiple access points. Look at the deluxe, closest. The language that they're using is incredibly generic, right? Now, this is actually a limitation on the property management systems, in that the capability to offer units in a multiple prices is something that the property management systems were not designed to do. And so all of this kind of information, or the information that would be really needed to support a more specific understanding of why a unit is standard, best value, or deluxe, is actually unable, it's currently the property management system that holds all this information, the transaction system, doesn't allow this information to be maintained anywhere. And so, if we get questions on the Q&A, I can go through this. I won't go through the details of how we fool the system into being able to carry these prices, if you will. But suffice it to say that what we've been able to do is allow multiple prices to be offered in a system that was not designed originally to do that. And so the next step might be to say, do you believe that with generic descriptions like this, closer, and closest, will you get a higher upgrade from this kind of generic description than I was showing you before? So remember, we were seeing 20 to 30% upgrades before, when somebody could talk to you at the store about the benefits of the better, or the best value, or the deluxe. They could actually point out what the difference in those specific units are, so you could get a very, very tangible sense. Here you cannot. Okay. And I will tell you, and Kevin can talk more about this, but even with this generic description, you end up getting online about 60% of the people to choose the best value or the deluxe. They choose to pay more for a unit that the other company wasn't even, they were not offering the customer the choice of paying a little bit more for convenience. And this is a very big, I'll call it, change in the way that people are now beginning to think about how to present and sell their inventory. Okay. If we talk about the benefits of what happens here, and this slide graciously provided by Storage Mart, and so Kevin can certainly talk to this a bit more in more detail than I will. But here you see of a graph of what their achieved rate is versus their asking rate. The achieved rate is blue, the asking rate is red. Now, what's the difference between achieved and asking? Asking rate is essentially that lowest price for the inventory group, and achieved is what people are actually renting their units for. So it will reflect the fact that some people choose to pay more for those units, and that's why your asking rate can be lower than your achieved rate. Now, one of the things I want to point out, there are seasonal changes in demand and supply that you can have naturally, places during the year where the asking rate goes down. And so here, if you take a look at this in early December 2020, you had your asking rate went down, and again, it went down here in kind of early April. But look what happens to the achieved rate. Yes, there's a decline that matches this, but it is nowhere near as steep. Same thing from March to April. There's a little bit of a decline, but nowhere near as steep, which means that your ability to offer the higher, more convenient, the more convenient units at the higher price is providing a very big cushion to keeping your revenues from potentially going down as much as they might have. And so these may very well be times when more and more people are upgrading. And one of the things that's kind of an interesting one is it turns out that in facilities that, let's say, are lower occupied, where there's a bigger difference between what's the most desirable, the mid desirable, the least desirable in each unit group, the upgrade rates will generally increase. And so for companies that are operating new stores where they're starting off totally vacant, it gives them an entirely new way to be competitive. Typically, if a self-storage facility was opening a new store, they would need to make a choice. Do they offer a rate that's lower there than their competitors to build occupancy quickly, but then you're stuck with a lot of people who you've brought in at very low rates? Or conversely, they would sometimes have a higher rate, build occupancy more slower, but they bring people in at the rate that they want to bring them in at. And they get their asking rate better, but occupancy builds slower. At a competitive level, the ability to offer and implement value pricing means that they can do things like offer a lower rate on the website to be competitive with their, to undercut the competition, if you will, but then have margins that are much higher than normal for that best value and deluxe product. So that because so many more people upgrade when they have a larger choice of units, because the differential between what a good, better, and best unit location is, they actually can lower the, if you will, the intro rate, the web rate, knowing that 60–70% of the people are going to upgrade anyway. And so they build demand faster because they capture demand through the low website price. And then they capture higher revenue because so many people upgrade. And it has changed fundamentally the economics of opening a new store in a lot of ways. Okay. Across a variety of companies, just to show you this, if you look at, there are many different implementations for value pricing. What you're seeing here is across a variety of companies, how many companies have an upgrade rate that's lower than 20%, that's between 20 and 50%, and above 50%. So again, what you're seeing here, for example, is 54% of the companies that we have in this group ended up with an upgrade rate that between 20 and 50% of their customers upgrade. And so you've got about a fifth of the companies where they're actually implementing this program in such a way that more than 50% of their customers choose to pay more than they were previously allowed to pay. And think about that for a second. because that's an enormous revenue impact. I mean, by offering these two prices that are higher than they would otherwise have asked, you've just given customers an opportunity to pay more for a unit. You haven't had to define your units in a new product class. It is just that you are pricing them based on their relative convenience in the asset class. And it's a remarkable sense of you've empowered the customer to do what they want, and many of them are choosing to pay more, even with only generic descriptions when they do it online. And kind of like as I come to a close and we get ready for some questions, I want to show you something else that we took a look at that, again, I think is a very interesting commentary on what this means for the revenue of companies in the long term. We asked ourselves, can higher rents be sustained? That is, maybe you can bring people in at a higher price, but after you go through a few rent increase cycles, and typically rents will get increased every, call it 6 to 12 months. Different companies have different policies. Some companies will raise rents on a customer every 6 or 7 months. Some wait 11 or 12 months. Some don't do it at all, but that's a small minority of companies that are giving up a lot of revenue. But here you have 3 companies. And what we did was we took a look at the larger inventory groups. So not inventory groups with only 10, 20, or 30 units. Larger groups where we took a look at what rents were being paid for the least convenient units. Those were in the bottom 25% of the unit group. What we called the less convenient units were the next 25%. The convenient units that were essentially 25 to the 50 percentile in terms of most convenient unit in the group. And then the very convenient and most convenient units. So the most convenient units were the top 10%. And we looked at the average rent being paid for those units at some companies that were implementing this program. And what you see here is that over time, because they can be more aggressive with their rent increases with the people in the most convenient units, that you do have a remarkable ability to get higher rents over time and to sustain it for the people who are renting the more convenient units. And this provided essentially, it provides another revenue stream, or an enhanced revenue stream, I should say, for the operators from their customers. Okay? And I know I've kind of gone through this fairly quickly, and we're happy to take to questions on it, and I can certainly talk about the specifics of what we do. But what I really want to leave you with today is revenue management started off in the 1980s truly as just an inventory control capability. It wasn't pricing. Units were assigned to predetermined prices, and revenue management, as you saw there was a lot of demand, it cut the availability of the lower priced products off. What we're now doing is getting more and more sophisticated in how we incorporate dynamic pricing capabilities into revenue management. And what's really nice is that the data-driven aspect of revenue management really provides a very strong basis for this transition that we're now beginning to see occur. But it provides a very new way of modeling customer segmentation, customer purchase behavior than what I would say is traditional price demand elasticity analysis. And ultimately, in order for this to be successful, and this is something that Kevin may talk a little bit about in the question and answer, is that Enormous financial benefit is possible. Again, we're seeing increments of up to 9% or so on revenue. So it's an extraordinary large increase. But your ability to get that 9% versus 7% versus 5% versus 3% depends a lot on the implementation process that you adopt. And we have seen companies that they're so happy to get 2 and 3 percentage points more in revenue that they don't even pay much attention to the implementation. And they get the 2 and 3% and they're happy. And others that are larger, maybe more professionally run, have the ability to focus, will actually do will do their employee training. They will think about how to implement this, and they will get anywhere from 7 to 9% incremental revenue. So with that, Rajesh, I am happy to turn to questions. Again, the question is exactly, what do I need to do here now? I guess stop sharing the screen.
Yeah, so Warren, I think you'll see the Q&A button there, and you will see a number there. There's a question there. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Perfect. So the first question is, the 2017 Edelman Award winner was Holiday Retirement, supported by ProRise. And in the presentation, mostly driven by ProRise, they indicated how they applied their techniques at CubeSmart, another storage company. Can you indicate what is different about your approach? Absolutely. And it's interesting. ProRise has actually taken their model and they are they have modified it for self-storage. So, although I don't know the details of what ProRise is exactly doing, I will say in self-storage, there are 3 ways you can control revenue. You can use price demand modeling to control what is the starting rate that you offer to a customer. That is, if you go back to the websites, what price are you offering the 10 by 10 units for? Should it be $115? Should it be $120? Should it be $99? And that the price that you offer, typically you might assume that if you offer a lower price, you're going to generate higher demand. And so people will talk about what's the optimum price to offer based on what demand you'll see for that price level. Okay. Our system, as does ProRise, has techniques for determining what that price should be, what that base price is. Okay. And the ProRise system for Holiday Retirement had a particular technique that was designed to try to offer that, or to identify what that optimum price would be. What the ProRise system does not include, and ours is the only one that does that, is a capability that says, now let's offer higher rent, higher prices for those units, so that somebody doesn't just choose the base price, but they can choose to get a higher price, a more convenient unit in that same asset class. So if I'm hoping I'm answering this, but basically that better and best price is simply not offered in the ProRise system. So there is no capability to have customers upgrade for a more convenient unit in an asset class. And that was one of the things that Kevin, if you want to talk a little bit about, I'll call it Storage Mart's operations before value pricing and what you did to change it, maybe that's a good way, a good intro for that.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, perfect.
Okay, great. Let me go back to kind of the start, if you will, and where you talked about static pricing, Warren. We did have static pricing when we first started looking at revenue management. We knew that we had certain units that were more valuable, and we charged more for them. And our own data showed us that they were more highly occupied than our regular units, and the customers that rented them stayed longer than our regular units. So the question for revenue management or for value pricing then became, how do we create more of these premium units? And I don't want to get into too much detail, but what value pricing does is allow, if the first deluxe unit rents, then the next best unit then becomes deluxe. So it's a constantly changing dynamic structure based on who moves in and who moves out every day. What are the best units we have available, and what are the worst units we have available, and how do we present those to the customer? We started out just kind of dipping our toe in the water a bit with a few sites, not knowing what we would discover. And quite frankly, what we discovered is we were making a lot of money at those stores, and how do we roll it out to the rest of the portfolio as quick as we possibly can? It was obviously a big moneymaker from the start, and it has continued to do so through today. At Storage Mart, we started out with a 10% margin for best value units and a 22% margin for deluxe units. That worked very well, but as we got to know more and more about our customers, more and more about certain store managers or store locations that for whatever reason were able to upgrade at a very high percentage, with Veritec's help, we developed a dynamic margin capability. So based on how many upgrades we're getting at a store in a given size, we now have variable margins on best value from 10 up to 20, and on deluxe from 22 up to 40. And I don't have the number of how many stores are involved, but it's more than a dozen out of the 225 stores that we own that have maxed those out. Those are the bookends, those are the parameters, and we have at least a dozen stores now that have margins of 20 and 40%, up from where we started originally at 10 and 22. So the ability to gain that additional revenue, as Warren talked about, it's hard to find sometimes in self-storage, and this was by far one of the most productive and profitable projects that we have taken on. Just to add one point, Warren mentioned about the strategy of a new store or of a lease-up store. If you think about going back to his original website and looking at that airplane, and what if all the seats were vacant? You know, that's what we're looking at a new store. We open it up on day one, and every unit in the building is available. And instead of 100 seats on that airplane, we may have 1,000 units in a storage facility. So imagine the customer coming in and saying, you know, I can have this unit that's right next to the elevator, or the way we serve it up, we intentionally choose the least desirable as a standard price. So if you're looking at a new facility, it's literally the one that's right next to the loading dock or the elevator, versus the one that's way back in the corner that you have to do a lot of walking and carrying and pushing the cart and whatnot to get to. And so the difference is so obvious to the customer. Of course, I'll pay $10 more for this unit for the convenience. The upgrade rate on a lease-up store is more like 80%. So it really increases when the inventory is wide open like that. I can say that today, after a little over 7 years using value pricing, that 40% of all of our current customers are in an upgraded unit. So that's a pretty big unit. We have about 120,000 storage units. So you can see the numbers add up quite quickly when we're able to have that kind of conversion. I think one other thing I'd like to point out before we get into more detailed questions is Value pricing, I think, really taught us a valuable lesson. Before value pricing, we thought all of our customers were extremely price sensitive. And operations, we didn't even have a revenue management department. And operations set the pricing, and usually those who set the pricing were the regional managers that were on, boots on the ground in all of these markets. And basically, they were chasing competition. How do I set my rates? Well, I want to gain occupancy. How do I gain occupancy? I'm the cheapest in the market. Maybe some of the good regional managers would begin to think about what's my own occupancy, and do I really have to chase the competition that hard? But value pricing absolutely proved to us that there's a good segment of our customers, more than half easily, that are not price sensitive. It's not the number one thing that they're looking for. And we've been able to take that lesson that value pricing taught us and apply it to other programs that we use. Certainly customers do exist, and we have to cater to them that are price sensitive. We welcome them. We have the units available for them. They get the same treatment as everybody else. But we've certainly been able to take advantage of these people who are willing to pay for convenience, and it's been highly, highly successful for us.
And if I could build on something, Kevin, that you just said, one of the things that truly makes value pricing different and beneficial is, in the old world, if you will, pre-value pricing, as Kevin mentioned, if they had, let's call it on the second floor of a building, they had 100 of these 10 by 10, 100 square foot units. They might take the 5 or 10 of those units that were near the elevator, separate it out into a static group of, let's call it 10 units. They'll sell those for a higher price than the other 90 units. But they didn't have the ability to dynamically kind of look at which units are available now, which is the best of the units that's available. The best unit happens to be 2 turns from the elevator instead of 3 turns from the elevator, and say, since that's our best unit, we're going to charge that higher price because it is the best unit. They didn't have the ability, and it's very consuming operationally if you were to do this, to move a unit from one asset group to another. So once those 5 or 10 premium units got rented, they're not able to rent at that higher price anymore. Now, Kevin mentioned that 40% of their units are being rented in the better or best category. So think of it this way. Let's just pretend that 10% of their inventory could have been assigned to these static premium groupings. Well, that means 30% of their customers are now paying more than they would otherwise have paid. And Irv, that goes back to your very big question about, that's a capability that the ProRise system just doesn't offer. It's not to say that it can't be done outside of what we're doing, but prior to 2015, nobody was doing this dynamic type of reshuffling, if you will, every night, looking at, after move-ins and move-outs, which units are now the most desirable in the group of units that you are, in each of the group of units that you're doing. And there you go, 30% people paying arguably 15% more. Now you're up to about 4.5% incremental revenue than would otherwise have been possible, even from a company that was doing the static differentiation. Kevin, another question that was up earlier, can you talk about, I'll call it the implementation challenges, any of the most significant implementation challenges that you've had to face from this? And has it been more difficult, less difficult to implement this than you thought? Anything on the implementation side?
Sure. I would say overall it's probably easier than we thought it was going to be. As you've seen, there's not a lot of selling that goes on. It's pretty generic. When the customer is at the store, they literally visualize the difference between the two products, so it kind of sells itself in that way. So there was not a lot of training up front that had to be done to get this part of our standing operating procedures, if you will. I guess, and it's a detail that we haven't really talked about, but the way this dynamic unit shuffling happens is that all these units are assigned a value. We did it numerically, 1 through 100, or however many units there were. So if you think about taking one of these stores and having to say this unit is the very best, and this one's number 34, and this one's number 47, and so on and so forth, there is a little bit of time up front to set that up. The good thing about that is that it does not have to be perfect. Again, if you get 46 and 47 wrong, it's not a big deal. It's only the perception of the customer and what they see as the value of these units. So I think once that hurdle is passed, which happens right up front, right at the start, I've done several. I've probably done hundreds of them at this point, because I've helped a lot of other companies get started with value pricing, to the point that now if I have a really good site map, I can almost take care of the rankings from my desk. Not a lot of time, and you can map that out pretty quickly. So other than that, no big operational hurdles to get started. Very little training involved. Product sells itself, and it accelerated and was accepted extremely quickly. A side note, our really good store managers, when they were presented with the opportunity to sell value pricing, their reaction was, finally. Where have you been? I have been looking for something like this for years. I will never lose a sale because of price again. They were absolutely thrilled that we brought this product to them, and they, many of them are just superstars and can upgrade just about anything.
Nice. Thank you. Well, I think, Storage Mart was the first company to implement value pricing back in 2015. So back in 2015, this capability didn't exist prior to that. Now, I would say close to 5% of the industry is using this capability. And one thing to keep in mind is that the self-storage industry is incredibly fragmented. There have been estimates, I think something like there are 60,000 self-storage facilities in the United States, and there are 50,000 different self-storage companies. So there are a lot of companies that own 1, 2, 3, 4 stores. So it's very fragmented. And so a number of the larger operators are using this, but so are actually some of the, I'll call it smaller operators that tend to be professionally managed, more looking for what they can do to maximize their revenues. And it's been a strong success. And it is you now have at the self-storage, call it the national conferences, this capability is now being touted by some of the operators as just more and more important, especially in an age where people are trying to do more contactless rentals and trying to bring this capability online. And so in the industry itself, it's undergoing dramatic transformation in the way they sell their product online. And it's kind of exciting stuff. Rajesh, I don't know if we have any other questions.
So all the attendees are unmuted now. So if they have any questions, they can just unmute themselves and ask the question. And first of all, thank you, Kevin, for taking time out to come here and talk to us about the implementation at your site, at your company. I know there is some issue with your camera, so we can't see you. One question, I guess, on something that you were talking a little bit earlier. You mentioned that once you rank all the, I guess, the rooms or whatever, those units, uh, how often do you change the pricing there, or is it sort of a relatively static once you rank them and then assign them prices? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. We actually have a team of 3 analysts. We have 225 stores, as I said. We price 120,000 different units, and we also have about 15,000 parking spaces that we control. So we have quite a large inventory. We have a system that actually, with Veritec's help, provides us timely information every day. We try to look at individual stores at least 3 times a week. We have different alert queues that we look at. So if something changes overnight, if our own occupancy changed from yesterday, if our competition prices changed from yesterday, the analyst knows that right away. I would say that it is certainly not static, but we are fairly careful as analysts that once we change the price, we want to have that out there in the marketplace for a while just to see how the market will react to the price. Our peak time is, midsummer. There's a lot more people moving and activity needed for self-storage in the summer. And I would say that, during those times, we might change price a couple times a week. But in general, I would say the average is at least 2 weeks before we make a change, and sometimes longer than that, depending on the activity that we're getting on that price.
So is the competitor pricing, is that something that you gather, or does that come from Veritec Solutions itself?
Yeah, we have a scraping tool that we use. It's a third-party vendor, and scrapes the competitors' websites on a daily basis, so the analysts have fresh information when they come in every morning. Self-storage is a little bit antiquated compared to some businesses, and we do have competitors without websites. So we actually have to do manually shopping of these competitors, but any information we can get on their prices is better than not having any information at all. So it's a combination of both, but more and more stores now do have websites with prices on them.
Okay.
And even in Veritec system, we have also a capability where we go out when we are doing our, if you will, price optimization. And this goes back to the question that was asked earlier. We actually use we have a different modeling approach. We actually use multiple signals and look at different reasons, including non-transactional information, using non-transactional information for whether a price should be higher than it is, lower than it is for that base price. And so that starting price is kind of like another module, which for us includes our own price scraping capabilities. We layer value pricing on top of that. And then there's actually another module which looks on the rent increases and looks to see who should get a more aggressive rent increase and who should get a less aggressive rent increase. And that's what that additional area for revenue enhancement comes from for self-storage operators.
And how does how do you push those recommendations to your clients?
So much like airlines have reservation systems, self-storage operators have property management systems, kind of like a hotel, if you will. So these systems are ones where all the reservations are made, the move-ins, the move-outs. These property management systems are designed essentially like a Sabre, if you will. They're kind of like the heart of what of all the transactional based information. We integrate with those systems so that via APIs, if pricing changes are made in our system, we then input that information into the property management system. The websites integrate with the property management systems and they pull the information out. Earlier, I mentioned that, these property management systems weren't designed to, if you will, support multiple prices within a unit group. But many of those property management systems allow prices to be maintained at the unit level. So we're taking advantage of that feature that allows prices to be maintained at the unit level. And then we need to work with the operator and the PMS provider to make sure that the units are grouped together in an appropriate manner. And that's where we kind of fool the system into enabling multiple prices to be represented in the same group.
Okay. Kevin, one question I have from earlier on, you mentioned that, some of your regional managers, they might want to keep the prices low just to increase the occupancy, as opposed to what the solution might recommend a little bit higher price. I mean, was there some resistance to that part of it?
Absolutely. In fact, full reveal, I was a regional manager myself, so I come from an operations background and not a revenue management background. And quite honestly, I think that probably helped in the overall acceptance of revenue management within our company. It was coming from one of us, if you will. I was a regional manager. I knew all the rest of the team. I think it was a little bit easier to accept because it was coming from me, someone they knew, rather than, hey, we brought in this outside guy and he thinks he knows more about pricing than we do. There definitely was some territorial issues. Nobody knows my stores better than me. How can you price them better than I do? That kind of thing. Which I think is great. I'm glad that the regional managers felt that way. And when we first started the program, multiple emails and phone calls daily with questions and why did you do this? And this, you made a mistake. This is wrong. Kind of calls and emails. But over time, I think once we showed them what we were looking at, that we literally had so much more data at our hands than they ever did at the field, that they came to appreciate that fact that, yes, you have more data at your hands. You can make a better decision than I can. But I think more importantly, we gained their trust by showing them that the prices that we entered and displayed to the customers, they worked. It ended up win-win. It's not just revenue management versus operations. It's got to be teamwork. We have to work together. And I think once they saw the results of the prices that we were giving them, they were successful, and we were able to grow occupancy and hopefully revenue at the same time. And that made everybody happy.
Thank you, Kevin. Anybody in the audience has any questions? Okay. So first of all, I guess we will have a video recording which will be posted fairly shortly. And we should also have, just a second. Yeah. You can find the link on the website as well. And again, for the audience, if you have any suggestion in terms of speakers or any other questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email is listed on the screen. Warren, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. This was very educational. I really learned a lot on this topic. Very well presented. And I also want to thank Kevin again. Thank you for taking time to attend this and answering all our questions. We really appreciate your time, effort there. With that, I think I'm going to close this call unless somebody has any questions.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate that. I think we're doing the whole area of pricing has been very, very exciting. We're delighted to be part of it. So we're just thank you for giving us an opportunity to talk about some things that we just are very excited about.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Warren. Thank you, Kevin. Bye.
Thank you all.